Imagine just walking down the main street of this quiet rural village.
Right, a really typical small town.
Exactly, a place built for like 10,000 people. So the infrastructure, the grocery stores, the police presence, all of it is calibrated for this very specific, predictable rhythm of life.
Right, everyone knows everyone kind of
Right.
thing.
Now imagine dropping 2,000 transient individuals into this walled-off complex right on the edge of that village.
That's a massive shift.
It's a 20% population surge overnight. You don't just get a crowded town, you get this entirely new, incredibly strained ecosystem.
Yeah, the friction there would be immediate.
Absolutely. So today is Friday, March 27, 2026, and welcome to a deep dive that is going to take us directly into the friction point of that exact scenario.
It's a fascinating one today.
It really is. We are looking at this stack of transcripts and on-the-ground footage from a YouTube channel called Dutch Travel Maniac.
Yes.
And the core mystery we're pulling apart today is profound. Like, how does a small Dutch village handle that kind of influx?
And crucially, why is there such an absolute glaring chasm between what the official government agencies report is happening
Right.
and what this independent guy with the camera claims to be documenting on the actual pavement?
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, hold on. Before we move an inch into the material, I really have to step in and establish the parameters of this analysis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Because the sources we are unpacking today, they deal with highly charged, deeply sensitive claims. We're talking about immigration, national borders, criminality, government policy, all the hot-button issues.
It's a minefield.
It is. So let me be unequivocally clear here to you listening. Neither of us is taking a political stance here.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints presented. We aren't validating the political ideology of this YouTuber, nor are we validating the specific policies of the Dutch government entities that he's targeting.
Right, we're just looking at the source.
Exactly. Our singular objective in this deep dive is to impartially convey, deconstruct, and analyze the claims. We're looking at the citizen journalism methods presented in this specific source material because, frankly, it's a piece of media that is actively shaping public discourse.
That is a crucial framing for everything that follows, because to even begin deciphering the chaotic environment described in these transcripts, we really have to lay out the geography.
Geography is everything here.
It is. So the epicenter of this footage is Ter Apel. And this isn't just some random town. It is the site of the largest asylum seeker reception center in the Netherlands.
And just to reiterate those numbers, because they matter, you have roughly 10,000 local residents situated right next to a facility housing over 2,000 asylum seekers.
Yeah, it's staggering. And the source also pulls in the surrounding infrastructure, specifically the nearby city of Emmen.
Which serves as a major transit hub, right?
Exactly, lots of bus traffic. And there's also another asylum center they visit located in a municipality called Boedel.
Well, the physical geography completely dictates the social reality here. I mean, you cannot concentrate a massive, highly transient population into a geographically isolated rural area.
Right, without totally changing the place.
Without fundamentally altering the daily mechanics of that space. The local infrastructure simply isn't designed to absorb the logistical footprint of 2,000 people who have no permanent ties to the area.
No localized employment, no long-term stake in the community.
Exactly.
And stepping into that very specific tension is our guide, the YouTuber. His stated premise for being there, his whole justification for wandering around with a camera, is his assertion that the mainstream media and the Dutch government are systematically withholding the full picture.
He believes there's a sanitized bureaucratic narrative being pushed from the top down.
Right, and that compels him to conduct these like rogue street-level interviews. But I mean, we really have to look critically at the nature of this kind of citizen journalism.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's akin to comparing, say, a restaurant's Yelp reviews from angry customers to their official health inspection report.
That's a great analogy.
Right, because the corporate report is going to smooth over every failure, but that Yelp review, or in this case the YouTube footage, is heavily curated by the person choosing when to press record.
Yeah, he has a lens. The guy with the camera might be capturing genuine friction, but he also has an algorithmic incentive to find the most dramatic, highest conflict interactions possible.
Exactly. But what's interesting is how that gap creates what you call a narrative void, right?
Yes, that tension between the official report and the curated street footage is what generates a narrative void. This is a crucial concept for understanding this entire source.
Break that down a bit for us.
So a narrative void forms when the institutions managing a crisis, whether that's the government press office or the managing agency, are perceived by the local public as broadcasting a reality that drastically contradicts what citizens see on their own sidewalks.
Like telling people it's not raining while they're standing in a downpour?
Precisely. Nature abhors a vacuum, and information ecosystems are no different. When official transparency is perceived to fail, independent actors with smartphones step into that void.
They provide the raw, localized data that the bureaucratic summary omits.
Exactly. And regardless of the YouTuber's personal bias or his monetization incentives, the fact that he is finding a massive, highly engaged audience proves that this narrative void exists.
People are watching because it validates what they're feeling.
Yes, and the local population feels a profound anxiety that their institutional leaders are ignoring.
Okay, so holding both those realities in our minds, the institutional sanitization and the YouTuber's inherent bias, the source takes us from the public streets right up to the gates of these asylum centers.
And this is where it shifts from a geographical dispute into a breakdown of operational logistics.
Yeah, because the overarching question becomes, if the government is offering a sanitized public relations spin, what do the individuals actually working inside the facility have to say?
And the source material leans heavily on testimony gathered from security personnel.
But crucially, these interviews are conducted anonymously.
Which is telling in itself.
Right. The anonymity is the first major red flag regarding the internal culture. These guards are having their faces blurred and their voices altered.
Because they explicitly cite a fear of severe professional and personal retaliation if they speak on the record.
Yeah. But under the cover of that anonymity, they describe an environment that just sounds completely unmoored from official control.
It sounds chaotic.
Beyond chaotic. They allege that massive physical altercations and stabbings are not anomalies, but weekly occurrences inside the Ter Apel Center.
Look, any facility housing 2,000 people who have recently traversed multiple borders under high stress will inevitably see interpersonal conflict. The statistical probability of zero violence is basically non-existent.
Sure, that makes sense.
However, the critical operational failure the guards are alleging isn't just the presence of violence.
What is it then?
It is the complete absence of a disciplinary apparatus to address it.
Ah. Yeah, the guards claim there are virtually zero consequences for violent behavior. Like, none.
Even when individuals are identified harassing local Dutch women in the town square.
Right. The guards state these individuals are simply escorted back into the center with no legal or administrative penalty.
It's just a slap on the wrist.
Barely even that. The source details this specific bureaucratic workaround referred to as the VBL system.
We should probably clarify that term for the listener.
Yeah, please do.
VBL stands for Vrijheidsbeperkende Locatie, which translates to a location with restricted freedom.
Sounds serious.
In theory, it is. It's an administrative designation meant to physically separate troublemakers from the general population, while their asylum claims are fast-tracked for rejection.
Right. But the way the guards describe the VBL in practice completely undermines that theory.
How so?
Well, they claim that when an asylum seeker commits a violent act, they aren't handed over to the state police. They aren't deported.
They're just shuffled around.
Exactly. They are administratively shuffled to a VBL, which is often just a different building located on the exact same physical compound.
That doesn't sound very restricted.
It's not. Because the physical security is so porous, the guards allege these individuals can simply hop a perimeter fence and walk right back into the same city center within 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, to just resume whatever they were doing. It's an administrative shell game. The paperwork says the violent individual has been restricted, but physically they haven't moved at all.
And that administrative shell game has severe physical consequences for the workforce.
Oh, for sure. One of the anonymous guards describes a situation where he was severely bitten on the hand by a resident.
That's horrifying.
It is. The overarching sentiment from these interviews is a profound sense of institutional abandonment.
Well, they're tasked with the mandate of security. That implies they possess the authority and the physical infrastructure to actually secure the premises.
But they don't. They claim they are completely stripped of the tools, the entry protocols, and the administrative backing required to do that job safely.
The lack of entry protocols is really one of the most baffling claims in this entire transcript.
Honestly, it blew my mind. I mean, wait, we operate in a society where you have to take off your shoes and walk through a millimeter wave scanner just to board a commercial flight.
Yeah. You pass through metal detectors just to enter a local courthouse.
Yes. Yet these guards assert that there are literally zero physical entry checks.
None.
No metal detectors, no bag searches, no drug-sniffing dogs, nothing for individuals walking into a high-tension, government-run facility housing thousands of people.
So the guards assert that residents simply walk through the gates, allowing an unfettered flow of weapons and contraband?
Yep.
But, the deeper, more systemic allegation here involves the COA.
That's the Central Agency for the Reception of Asylum Seekers, right?
Exactly. The guards claim that the official safety inspections conducted by COA are entirely fabricated.
Wait, fabricated, like faked.
Yes. They allege these inspections are highly choreographed performances designed strictly to artificially depress the official incident metrics.
Wow, just to maintain a public facade of operational control.
Precisely.
It's like a hospital administrator recalibrating the thermometer so that a patient's raging fever registers as a normal body temperature.
That's exactly what it is.
You haven't cured the infection at all, you've just corrupted the measurement tool so you don't have to file the paperwork.
Sociologists refer to this specific dynamic as institutional paralysis.
Institutional paralysis, I like that term.
It occurs when a managing bureaucracy becomes so consumed with protecting its political narrative and satisfying upper management metrics that it completely detaches from the physical reality on the ground.
Right, because for COA, actively searching bags or enforcing strict entry protocols would inevitably lead to drug confiscations.
Weapons seizures, recorded arrests, all of that generates negative data points.
And in a metric-driven bureaucracy, negative data points suggest failure to the politicians in The Hague.
Therefore, the path of least resistance for the institution is to simply stop looking for the contraband. By enforcing willful blindness at the gates, the official crime statistics remain beautifully low.
Even if the actual environment is rapidly deteriorating?
Exactly.
Man, so if the gates are wide open and the institution is willfully blind, that lack of friction inevitably breeds secondary consequences, right?
Without a doubt.
Because if you can walk into a facility of 2,000 people carrying literally whatever you want in your backpack, you aren't just bringing in personal items.
No, you were bringing in the inventory for an entirely unregulated microeconomy.
Yes. And the source material transitions here to examine what happens when thousands of people exist in a state of prolonged limbo without any structural enforcement.
The YouTuber actually interviews a former asylum seeker, right?
Yeah, a guy who spent 11 days living inside the Ter Apel Center.
And how do you describe it?
Well, this individual is currently moving successfully through the Dutch immigration process, but his assessment of the environment inside the center is incredibly harsh.
What did he say?
He offers this localized statistic, which, we should note, is entirely his own anecdotal estimation.
Sure.
But he claims that 70% of the residents in Ter Apel are not genuine refugees fleeing immediate war zones, but are instead there to, quote, make a shit show.
That's a strong claim.
Very.
Right.
And he backs it up by describing a sprawling, open-air drug market operating with absolute impunity.
Inside the center.
Inside the center. We are talking about counterfeit cigarettes, marijuana, and hard narcotics being sold openly.
Often within the direct line of sight of the security personnel.
Yes. The same personnel who, as we just established, are trapped in that state of institutional paralysis.
So to test the veracity of these claims, the YouTuber and the former resident conduct what the transcript frames as an undercover investigation.
At the Butyl Asylum Center, yeah.
Right. And this Butyl experiment is a staggering sequence to read through.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the former resident goes inside the Butyl facility specifically to test the speed and efficiency of this alleged black market.
And the timestamps he reports upon exiting are shocking.
Totally shocking. He claims it took him exactly 2 minutes to locate and purchase illegal counterfeit cigarettes from an operator working out of the facility's communal kitchen.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Then he says it took him 5 minutes to procure hashish.
Okay.
And it took a mere 10 minutes to arrange the purchase of a package of cocaine.
10 minutes to buy hard narcotics inside a government-administered asylum center.
Yeah. And furthermore, he asserts this isn't isolated to one rogue individual. He claims this sophisticated level of illicit retail access is readily available in at least 4 to 6 different locations across the Dutch asylum network.
We really have to analyze the underlying mechanics that allow a market of that speed and efficiency to flourish.
Right. How does it happen so fast?
The former resident points directly to a psychological catalyst, the short-timer mentality.
The idea that if you know you are leaving in a week, you have zero reason to care about the state of the building.
Exactly. Or the state of the community. In a typical municipal environment, social order is maintained not just by police, but by the residents' long-term investment in their surroundings.
Right, you don't destroy the neighborhood you plan to raise your children in.
But in these transit centers, individuals know they only have 10 to 14 days before they are processed, transferred, or rejected.
So the social contract just completely evaporates.
They are transient actors in a temporary space. When you combine a transient population possessing a short-timer mentality with a facility that has effectively dismantled its own security apparatus.
A shadow structure will instantly materialize to govern the space.
Precisely. And historically, in any unregulated holding environment, whether it's a refugee camp, a temporary mining boomtown, or an understaffed prison, that shadow structure is governed by the illicit trade of highly liquid commodities.
Tobacco and narcotics.
Exactly.
I mean, the logic holds, but an illicit economy of that magnitude where you can buy bulk counterfeit cigarettes and cocaine on demand, that requires serious capital.
It requires a constant influx of cash.
Exactly. It also requires the buyers and sellers to maintain a degree of anonymity so they don't jeopardize whatever sliver of a chance they have at securing permanent residency.
Right.
So the obvious question is, how are these individuals funding this black market strip mall, and how are they avoiding systemic identification?
Which brings us to a deep dive into the Dutch government's own administrative processes, specifically the IND.
Yeah, let's talk about the IND. They are the Immigration and Naturalization Service, right?
Yes, they're the federal body tasked with the initial intake, screening, and processing of every asylum claim.
And a source within the video presents a claim about this IND screening process that is just honestly difficult to process.
What's the plan?
They allege that the initial intake interview for an arriving asylum seeker consists of merely 6 yes or no questions.
6.
Just 6. There are allegedly no deep, comprehensive background checks conducted upon arrival. The government, according to the source, is heavily relying on basic facial recognition technology to cross-reference known databases.
But the source immediately points out the fatal flaw in that system, which is the phenomenon of passport dumping.
Ah, right. Passport dumping. Break that down.
Passport dumping is a heavily documented tactic within global migration routes. The mechanics of it are straightforward but devastating to bureaucratic systems.
Okay.
An individual traveling toward Europe will intentionally destroy or discard their passport and national identification documents before crossing the final border into the destination country.
So by doing that, they effectively wipe their own hard drive.
Exactly. They arrive at the intake desk as a completely blank slate.
Meaning the IND cannot quickly verify their country of origin, their true age, or, most critically, whether they have a violent criminal history in their home nation.
Right. The source explicitly states, quote, "We don't know who is coming in."
That's terrifying. If someone committed a felony in another country, but they managed to reach Ter Apel without their passport, the biometric scan will only flag them if they are already in an international Interpol database.
Otherwise, they answer the 6 questions and are granted entry into the system.
And once they are entered into the system, the economic mechanisms of the Dutch state take over.
The source details the precise financial benefits granted to residents upon arrival.
Right, because the basic necessities are obviously covered. Residents receive free lodging within the center, and they are provided with meals, which, the source notes, are served once a day.
But the catalyst for the illicit economy is the discretionary cash.
Yes. The Dutch government provides a weekly stipend of 58.80, which is directly deposited into the residents' accounts or handed out as cash every single Monday.
In the official bureaucratic language, it is literally referred to as pocket money.
Pocket money. I mean, we should contextualize the origin of that stipend.
Yeah. Historically, providing a small amount of discretionary funds was designed to grant asylum seekers a basic level of human autonomy.
The ability to buy their own shampoo, make a phone call, or purchase a bus ticket.
Without having to petition a government worker for every single minor need. It reduces administrative overhead.
Sure, the intention might be autonomy, but the YouTuber does the rudimentary math to show the macro effect of that policy.
It adds up fast.
It really does. If you take that roughly 60 euros a week and multiply it by the 2,000 residents living in the Ter Apel facility, the Dutch government is injecting approximately 6 million euro a year in pure, unregulated discretionary cash into a single, highly concentrated location.
Wow. 6 million euros.
And we just established that this location features an open-air drug market and 0 security checks at the gates.
Right.
While it would be, a vast overstatement to assume every euro goes to narcotics, it is mathematically undeniable that a significant portion of that 6 million state subsidy is serving as the foundational liquidity for the shadow economy inside the gates.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the economic pull of that stipend also influences the demographic makeup of the migrating population.
Which the source material heavily emphasizes.
The footage repeatedly highlights that the vast majority of the individuals navigating the streets around the center are young, military-aged men.
Yeah, and the YouTuber conducts interviews with several of them, including a young Algerian man and a 23-year-old Palestinian man.
The conversation with the Palestinian man is a stark revelation of the economics at play here.
It really is. This young man states, quite casually, that he arrived in Ter Apel just 3 days prior, having traveled directly from Germany.
And when asked why he left Germany, a perfectly safe, highly developed European nation, what does he say?
He explains that Germany gives, quote, no money.
Unbelievable.
He describes the German system as kaput, but states that Holland gives good money.
That interview is a perfect, on-the-ground illustration of a phenomenon debated endlessly in policy circles. Asylum shopping.
Asylum shopping. Let's really drill down into that concept. It sounds inherently cynical, but the testimony seems to validate it completely.
It is a framework based on rational choice theory.
Excellent.
Well, the premise of the International Asylum Framework, drafted in the wake of World War II, is that individuals flee across the nearest border to escape immediate persecution or death.
Right, seeking safety above all else.
However, asylum shopping suggests that while the initial catalyst for leaving a home country might be danger or severe economic hardship, the subsequent movement across safe secondary borders is driven by highly calculated economic decisions.
So migrants are no longer just fleeing from a crisis. They're actively migrating to the most advantageous welfare architecture available.
Exactly. They will traverse multiple safe European countries, bypassing Greece, Italy, or Germany, specifically targeting a nation like the Netherlands because of the 58.80C weekly payout.
And the perceived leniency of the 6-question IND screening and the low historical rate of actual deportations.
The Palestinian man's calculation wasn't based on physical safety. It was an arbitrage of state welfare systems.
Which effectively transforms an intended humanitarian sanctuary into a highly subsidized, unregulated zone that attracts opportunistic migration. And the critical failure here is that the consequences of this system, the influx of untraceable cash, the thriving narcotics trade, the lack of behavioral consequences inside the VBL that cannot be neatly contained behind the chain-link fences of Ter Apel.
It never stays contained.
Right. The pressure invariably ruptures the perimeter and spills out onto the public streets, violently disrupting the local Dutch communities.
This is where the source material shifts from analyzing administrative failures to documenting the profound sociological damage inflicted on the local citizenry.
The spillover effect.
Exactly. We see the concept of the spillover effect manifesting in the daily lives of the working class.
We hear from a local shop owner in Ter Apel, and her testimony is just a visceral reminder of what happens when the state loses control of a population.
What happened to her?
She recounts an incident where 2 men from the asylum center stood on the public street outside her store, stared through the windows at the female employees, and began publicly masturbating in broad daylight.
That is horrific.
It is. The situation in the village has escalated to such a degree that she felt compelled to purchase pepper spray for her 23-year-old daughter.
Who lives near the central train station in the neighboring city of Emmen, right?
Yes. And that specific train station in Emmen serves as the flashpoint for what the source describes as the bus crisis.
The bus crisis. This is a perfect case study in how municipal governments attempt to manage the spillover effect when federal policies fail.
Right, because Emmen is the major transit connection for Ter Apel, linked by a specific bus line.
And originally the fare for this bus was $5.
Exactly. However, according to the transcripts, the local government recently enacted a policy making this specific bus route entirely free for asylum seekers.
Now, the rationale behind this decision is deeply unsettling.
Why did they do it?
The fare was eliminated because large groups of asylum seekers were aggressively harassing, physically threatening, and spitting on the local Dutch bus drivers when they were asked to pay the faro.
So the elimination of that bus fare represents a massive, highly visible capitulation by the state.
It absolutely is.
It's treating public transit like a containment vessel. Like, instead of utilizing law enforcement to arrest individuals for assault, vandalism, or fare evasion, the municipal government simply deleted the rule.
Yeah.
It's like disconnecting the check engine light on your dashboard while the car's transmission falls out onto the highway.
It's spot on.
The underlying mechanical failure of violence hasn't been addressed. The state has simply removed the friction point, the cash register, so the driver doesn't have to suffer the physical consequences of the state's inability to maintain order. It's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
And even with the friction of the fare removed, the logistical triage required to keep that single bus route operational is financially absurd.
Oh, the security detail.
Yes, the YouTuber documents the scene at the Emin bus stop, revealing that the government has deployed a private security detail.
Right.
He calculates that there are 6 private security guards stationed at the stop every single hour of the day, strictly to monitor the boarding process of this one bus line.
6 guards for one bus stop.
He estimates the state is burning through roughly 120 an hour just to have bodies standing on the pavement as a visual deterrent.
Yet the deterrence is a complete illusion.
How do you mean?
The YouTuber interviews one of the bus drivers who lays out the bleak psychological reality of his job. I mean, he is operating a multi-ton vehicle completely solo.
Right.
At every stop, he is confronted by groups of aggressive young men who operate with the knowledge that there are no structural consequences for their actions.
Because of the VBL shuffle we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The driver frankly admits that for his own physical preservation to avoid being assaulted or spat upon, he just opens the doors and lets them on, ticket or no ticket.
He has been systematically beaten into submission by the threat of violence.
Well, the state essentially looks the other way.
And the state's response to this breakdown in public order is highly selective, which the YouTuber actually experiences firsthand.
Yes, this interaction perfectly encapsulates the inverted priorities of the local authorities.
Walk us through what happens.
Okay, so the YouTuber is standing on a public street, legally filming the chaos near the transit hub.
Right.
He is aggressively approached by 2 men who demand he stop recording them. The situation escalates, and the authorities are called.
And who do the police focus on?
When the security and police arrive, they don't intervene with the men initiating the intimidation. Instead, they target the YouTuber.
Unbelievable.
They demand he stop filming and attempt to move him away.
Well, we really have to view that police response through the lens of bureaucratic incentives.
What do you mean by that?
Law enforcement in an overwhelmed environment naturally seeks the path of least resistance.
Right. It's easier to deal with one guy than a mob.
Exactly.
Huh.
Engaging with a hostile group of transient men who have nothing to lose, who might not possess identification, and whose arrest will generate massive amounts of paperwork and potential physical risk that's highly undesirable.
So they go for the easy target.
Conversely, telling a lone Dutch citizen with a camera to pack up and leave is an easy, low-risk way to instantly de-escalate the immediate tension on the street.
The police are prioritizing immediate public quiet over the equal enforcement of the law.
Yes.
But by prioritizing that quiet, they're actively punishing the citizen for documenting the state's failure.
And that breeds a profound, toxic resentment among the local working class.
The shop owners, the bus drivers, the citizens who feel entirely abandoned by the policymakers in The Hague.
Because the politicians are insulated in capital cities.
Completely shielded from the daily realities of an unregulated VBL, while the 23-year-old daughter with pepper spray is left to navigate the wreckage.
It's a stark contrast.
It really is, which brings us to the final and perhaps most frustrating layer of this deep dive. How do the official architects of this system react when they are directly confronted with the street-level reality?
The institutional response documented in the source is defined by an impenetrable wall of silence and aggressive compartmentalization.
Yeah. The YouTuber manages to secure a confrontation with an official spokeswoman for COA, the agency responsible for the senders and those allegedly faked safety inspections.
And how does that go?
He puts the reality of the streets directly to her. He asks about the rampant weapons, the daily stabbings, and the explicit testimony from her own security guards who claim they are operating in fear for their lives.
And her response?
It's a masterclass in bureaucratic evasion. She flatly refuses to address a single specific allegation. She simply repeats a standardized corporate line, insisting that COA does, quote, everything in their power to make it work.
Classic institutional deflection.
Totally. But the YouTuber, possessing days of footage showing open-air drug markets and terrified bus drivers, looks at her and outright rejects her premise. He states on camera that he simply does not believe a word she is saying.
Well, the institution doesn't just rely on PR evasion. They actively enforce a culture of visual secrecy on the ground.
Yeah, they really do.
Throughout the source footage, everywhere, the YouTuber attempts to point his lens, whether it's at the exterior gates of the Ter Apel Center, in the middle of the local town square, or at the public bus terminal in Emmenplan,
Yeah.
he meets intense resistance.
From everyone. Security guards, COA middle management, even some of the asylum seekers themselves aggressively command him to stop filming.
They treat the entire municipality as if it were a classified military installation.
Despite the fact that he is operating entirely on public property.
They are terrified of the visual evidence puncturing that narrative void.
Absolutely. And while the agencies on the ground are fighting desperately to suppress the current reality, the future projections from the federal government seem entirely disconnected from the crisis.
What's the plan moving forward?
The source notes that Prime Minister Jet has officially announced plans to expand the system and open more of these asylum reception centers in municipalities across the country.
Opening more of them.
Yes. And in conjunction with that expansion, the transcript reveals a financial policy that absolutely shatters the fundamental social contract between the state and the citizen.
You were referring to the municipal payouts.
Yes. The YouTuber details a situation in a district called Lockham, which already hosts an asylum center.
Okay.
The federal government is so acutely aware of the violent spillover effect generated by these facilities that they are issuing payouts to the local residents.
Just handing out cash.
Yes. The state is giving citizens in Lockham 1,000 euros in cash specifically to fortify and secure their own private homes.
We really need to pause and examine the profound philosophical implications of that 1,000 payout.
Please do.
The foundational premise of a modern democratic state is the monopoly on violence and the guarantee of collective security. Citizens pay taxes, and in return, the state provides police, secure borders, and public safety.
Exactly. Wait, consider the contradiction here. The official stance of the state, as parroted by the COA spokeswoman, is that these centers are safe, the situation is under control, and they are doing everything in their power.
Right.
If that is true, why is the federal government quietly transferring 1,000 euros a pop to private citizens so they can buy stronger padlocks, build higher fences, and install private security cameras?
It is an absolute, undeniable admission of state failure.
They are essentially privatizing public safety because they refuse to enforce order at the source.
This raises an important question. When a government engages in actions that so drastically contradict its own public messaging, the societal trust degrades exponentially.
Completely.
The official message is, the system is functioning. But the official action is, here's cash to barricade your front door.
The cognitive dissonance is deafening.
When you pair that cognitive dissonance with the aggressive wall of silence where police ticket the cameraman and guards block the lenses on public sidewalks, the institutions inadvertently validate every suspicion the YouTuber holds. When the state demands secrecy in public spaces to protect a failing policy, they erode the legitimacy of their own institutions far faster than the actual localized crime does.
Because it just looks like a cover-up.
Exactly. The attempt to cover up the friction only deepens the narrative void, driving citizens further away from official channels and deeper into alternative media to find explanations for the chaos on their doorsteps.
So what does this all mean? It is a phenomenal, deeply troubling journey this source material took us on today.
It really is.
Let's synthesize the sheer scale of the systemic breakdown we've explored. We started in a quiet Dutch village, fundamentally destabilized by the insertion of 2,000 transient individuals.
Right.
We unpacked the mechanical failure of the VBL system and heard from anonymous guards who claim that metric-driven institutional paralysis has resulted in zero entry checks and faked safety reports.
Then there was the Buell experiment.
Yes. Breaking down a $6 million a year shadow economy where the short-timer mentality fuels an open-air drug market inside a government compound. We explored how a simplistic 6-question IND screening process, combined with passport dumping and the 58.80 weekly stipend, incentivizes asylum shopping across safe European borders.
Right.
And finally, we witnessed how the state attempts to manage the resulting spillover by eliminating bus fares to appease aggressors, deploying a 120-an-hour security theater, silencing the cameras of its own citizens, and ultimately funding the private barricading of local homes while denying the crisis exists.
It serves as a comprehensive case study in what occurs when bureaucratic ideology becomes entirely untethered from operational reality.
It really does. And while we must always remember the inherent subjective lens of the citizen journalist curating this footage, the raw structural realities, the free buses, the 1,000 fortification payouts, the undeniable demographic shifts on the streets, those cannot be dismissed as mere YouTube hyperbole.
No, the evidence is there.
But I want to turn this massive logistical breakdown back to you, the listener. Think about the physical infrastructure and the institutions governing your own community.
Yeah, how transparent are they really?
Right. How transparent is the machinery operating around you? When your municipal leaders announce a new housing initiative or publish their annual crime statistics, how much of your understanding relies on their glossy, sanitized press releases?
It's worth considering.
And how wide is the gap between those official reports and the actual frictional reality you observe on your own daily commute?
This specific set of transcripts leaves us grappling with a deeply unsettling paradox of the modern age.
What's that?
Well, we live in an era of unprecedented surveillance and connectivity. Theoretically, we are drowning in accessible information.
Sure.
Yet this source demonstrates that when a powerful institution decides to close its operational doors and a federal government chooses to quietly finance private home fortifications rather than address the root cause of public danger, the daily lived reality of an entire municipality can be effectively buried as an open secret.
Wow.
It forces a vital question. What other massive systemic breakdowns are operating right now, entirely hidden in plain sight, merely waiting for someone to point a camera at the contradiction?
A profound and necessary question to leave you with. Keep your eyes open, heavily scrutinize both the official reports and the alternative narratives, and never be afraid to look past the bureaucratic map to see the actual territory. Until the next deep dive.